The eviction notice landed on the coffee table with a soft thud. Andrew slid it toward me with his finger, his face blank as stone. "You have 30 days, he said. No explanation. No argument. Just those 5 words hanging in the air between us like poison. My chest tightened. Disbelief crashed into rage, both fighting for control of my voice. I stared at the paper, then at him, searching his face for any sign this was some sick joke. Nothing. He meant every word. "What is this?" I whispered. He stood up, straightening his shirt like we'd just discussed dinner plans. "Exactly what it says. You need to leave." My hands trembled as I picked up the notice. Official letterhead. Legal jargon. My name spelled out in cold, typed letters. This wasn't a prank. This was real. "My name is Claire," I started, then stopped myself. That wasn't right anymore. "No. My name is Elena Walsh," and this was the moment I realized my marriage was already over. Andrew walked toward the door, pausing only to glance back. "This house was never really yours," he said quietly. Then he left the room. I sat frozen on the couch, staring at the paper in my hands. The words blurred together as tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not for him. Andrew moved around upstairs like nothing had happened. I heard the shower running, heard him humming some tuneless melody. The normalcy of it made my skin crawl. How could he be so calm after dropping a bomb like this? Humiliation burned hotter than fear. We'd been married for 3 years. 3 years of me believing we were building a life together. 3 years of supporting his career, managing the house, playing the perfect wife. And this was how it ended. With a legal document and a cold dismissal? I read the notice again, forcing myself to focus through the anger. Something felt off about the wording. The language was strange, too formal in some places, too vague in others. Whoever drafted this had been careful, but not careful enough. My hands steadied as I studied each line. There had to be something here. Some clue. Some mistake. And then I saw it. A single phrase that didn't quite fit. That night I couldn't sleep. Andrew snored beside me, completely unbothered, while my mind raced with questions. How long had he been planning this? Days? Weeks? Months? I slipped out of bed at 2 in the morning and made my way downstairs. The house was dark and silent, every shadow feeling hostile now. This place I'd called home suddenly felt like enemy territory. I needed answers. I needed to understand what was happening. The basement office was where Andrew kept all our important documents. Tax returns, insurance policies, old mortgage paperwork. I'd only been down there a handful of times, usually just to grab something he asked for. But when I reached the door, my hand froze on the knob. It was locked. Andrew had never locked this door before. Ever. We didn't even have keys for most of the interior doors in this house. I tried the handle again, harder this time, as if force would make a difference. Nothing. The lock held firm. My pulse quickened. This wasn't impulsive. Andrew had planned this carefully, step by step. And whatever he was hiding down there, he didn't want me to find it. I stood in the hallway staring at that locked door, and suddenly I remembered something. A conversation from years ago that I'd nearly forgotten. My aunt, my mother's sister, had visited shortly after Andrew and I got engaged. We'd been sitting in her garden drinking tea when she mentioned this house. "Elena," she'd said, her voice careful, "make sure you understand what you're signing when you move in there." At the time I'd laughed it off. Aunt Marion was always overly cautious about everything. She kept copies of receipts from 10 years ago and triple-checked every contract she signed. But now, standing in front of that locked door, her words echoed differently. What had she meant? What had she known? I thought back to when Andrew and I first moved in together. I'd been 25, fresh out of graduate school, madly in love. Andrew was 30, confident and established. He owned this beautiful house, or so I believed, and I felt like the luckiest woman alive when he asked me to move in. It all happened so fast. One day we were dating, the next we were engaged, and then suddenly I was packing up my tiny apartment and moving into his family home. I trusted him completely. Why wouldn't I? The memory hit me like a slap. Signing day. We'd been at Andrew's lawyer's office, surrounded by stacks of papers. Mortgage refinancing, Andrew had called it. Just routine, he'd assured me when I hesitated over the first document. The lawyer, a friend of Andrew's family, had pushed paper after paper toward me. Sign here. Initial here. Date here. His voice had been so casual, so practiced that I'd barely read anything. Andrew sat beside me, his hand on my knee, squeezing gently whenever I slowed down. It's fine, Elena. Just standard stuff. We need to finish before lunch. So I signed. And signed. And signed. Every page blurred into the next. Legal terminology I didn't understand. Clauses about property rights and ownership transfers. I'd trusted Andrew to explain anything important. He never did. Now, standing in our dark hallway at 3 a.m, I realized what I'd been too naive to see back then. I had no idea what I'd actually signed. I'd put my name on documents I'd never read, agreements I'd never questioned. And Andrew had counted on that. My stomach turned. What had I agreed to? What had I signed away? The next morning, Andrew started removing my things from the shared spaces. I came downstairs to find my favorite books missing from the living room shelves. The photos of my family that used to sit on the mantel were gone. Where are my things? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Andrew didn't even look up from his coffee. Pack them. You'll need them when you move. I'm not moving. You are. He took a long sip, perfectly calm. 30 days, Elena. That's generous, considering. Considering what? He finally met my eyes, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. Nothing. No anger, no guilt, no emotion at all. Just cold calculation. Considering this isn't your house. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. Instead, I walked away before I said something I'd regret. That afternoon, I tried to check my email and found the Wi-Fi was down. I asked Andrew about it and he shrugged. Must be an outage. I'll call the company later. He never did. The house was becoming hostile, one small act of sabotage at a time. I waited until Andrew left for work before I started searching. If he was going to make me feel like an intruder in my own home, then I'd act like one. The attic was dusty and cramped, filled with boxes Andrew had brought from his parents' house years ago. He'd always meant to sort through them but never had. I pulled down box after box, coughing as dust clouds swirled around me. Most contained junk, old college textbooks, outdated electronics, forgotten decorations. But in the back corner, hidden under a moth-eaten blanket, I found something different. A cardboard file box, the kind lawyers use. The lid was warped with age and the tape sealing it had yellowed and cracked. My hands trembled as I pried it open. Inside were folders, dozens of them organized by year. Old envelopes stuffed with receipts and letters. Bank statements from the 90s. And then, near the bottom, a manila folder with the house's original address written on the tab in faded ink. I pulled it out carefully, my heart hammering. Whatever was inside this folder, Andrew hadn't wanted anyone to find it. He'd buried it deep, forgotten about it, assumed it would stay hidden forever. I was about to prove him wrong. I opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside was a copy of an old deed, the paper yellowed and brittle. The print was small and faded, but I could still make out the important details. Property address, 847 Riverside Drive. Our house. Transfer date, March 15, 1998. But the name at the top, the name of the person who had owned this house, made my heart stop. Marion Elizabeth Walsh. My aunt. My mother's sister. I read it again, certain I'd misunderstood. But there it was, clear as day. This house hadn't belonged to Andrew's family. It had belonged to mine. My mind raced backward through years of conversations. Andrew had always said his parents helped him buy this house. Family money, he'd called it vaguely whenever I asked. I'd assumed he meant inheritance or a loan from his father. He'd never mentioned my aunt. Not once. I pulled out more papers from the folder. Letters between my aunt and Andrew. Bank statements showing a wire transfer of nearly $200,000. A handwritten note that said, for Elena's future. She deserves stability. My vision blurred. My aunt had given Andrew this money, this house, for me, to ensure I'd have a home, a foundation, a secure future. And Andrew had taken it all and claimed it as his own. I sat in the dusty attic, papers spread around me, piecing together a story I'd never known existed. My Aunt Marion had been wealthy, old family money she'd inherited from my grandfather. She'd never married, never had children, and she'd always had a soft spot for me. In 1998, when Andrew was just starting his career, he'd approached her. I found letters proving it. He'd told her he wanted to buy a house, wanted to build a stable life, but was short on funds. He'd charmed her, impressed her, made her believe he was worthy of her trust. And Marion, generous and trusting, had helped him. But there had been conditions. I found them outlined in a letter she'd written to Andrew. "This money is for Elena's security," she'd written. "When you marry her, you'll transfer the deed to include her name. This house should belong to both of you, a true partnership." The letter was dated April 2, 1998. 2 weeks after the original purchase. Andrew was supposed to transfer ownership to include me the moment we married. That was the deal. That was what my aunt had required in exchange for her extraordinary generosity. But the transfer date on the deed was wrong. It didn't match our wedding date at all. Something didn't add up. I came downstairs with the folder hidden in my bag. Andrew was in the kitchen making dinner like this was just another normal evening. "Andrew," I said carefully, "I was thinking about the house's history. How long has it been in your family?" His shoulders tensed. "Just slightly, but I noticed." "Why are you asking?" "Just curious. You don't talk about it much." He turned to face me, his expression guarded. "My parents helped me buy it in '98. That's all you need to know." "But which parents? Your mom and dad, or?" "What does it matter?" His voice rose, sharp and defensive. Too fast. Too angry for such a simple question. I forced myself to stay calm. "It doesn't. I was just. Stop asking questions about things that don't concern you." He slammed a cabinet door shut. "You're leaving in 3 weeks anyway. Why do you care about the house's history?" I stared at him, seeing clearly now what I'd been blind to for years. He was scared. Beneath all that cold dismissal and control, Andrew was terrified I'd discover something. "I'm going out," he snapped, grabbing his keys. "And Elena? Stop snooping. You won't like what you find." At the door he paused. "Oh, and I'm changing the locks this weekend." Then he was gone. The next day the heat stopped working. Andrew claimed it was a mechanical failure, but I knew better. The day after that the hot water went out. Then the electricity in my bathroom. He was systematically making the house unlivable, trying to force me out without physically touching me. Every morning I woke up cold. Every shower was icy. Every evening I sat in darkness while the rest of the house blazed with light and warmth. "Just a few issues," Andrew would say with false sympathy. "Old house problems. The repairs are scheduled." They never were. But I refused to leave. I bundled myself in blankets. I heated water on the stove for washing. I used flashlights and candles. Whatever game he was playing, I could outlast him. Because now I had something he didn't know about. I had proof. I had my aunt's letters, the original deed, and the terms of their agreement. That night, I slept with the manila folder tucked under my pillow. If Andrew was willing to sabotage utilities, who knew what else he might do? These documents were my only leverage. I couldn't risk losing them. In the darkness I smiled. Andrew thought he was breaking me. He had no idea I was just getting started. On my lunch break I drove to the county records office. The building was old and bureaucratic, filled with rows of filing cabinets and the smell of dusty paper. A tired-looking clerk sat behind the front desk. "I need to look up a property record," I said. "Just for personal information. I'm not filing anything." She nodded, barely looking up. "Address. 847 Riverside Drive." Her fingers flew across her keyboard and I held my breath. Part of me wondered if I'd find nothing, if Andrew had somehow erased every trace of what he'd done. But after a moment the clerk's eyebrows rose. She leaned closer to her screen, reading something that made her frown. "Huh," she muttered. "That's odd." My pulse quickened. "What is?" She turned the monitor toward me. "This property has a conditional transfer on record from 1998. But it was never completed. According to this, the terms weren't fulfilled." "What does that mean?" I asked, though I was already beginning to understand. The clerk shrugged. "It means the ownership transfer isn't valid. The property technically still belongs to the original grantor, or their estate." "My aunt." "The house still belonged to my aunt's estate. Can I get copies?" I asked, my voice shaking. She nodded. "That'll be $2 per page. Print everything." I sat in my car in the parking lot, reading through the county records with trembling hands. It was all there, laid out in legal language I could barely comprehend but understood perfectly. The original deed transfer from my aunt to Andrew had been conditional. He was supposed to add my name to the title within 30 days of our marriage. That was the requirement. That was what Marion had demanded. But he never did it. The transfer had never been completed. The conditions had never been met. And according to property law, that meant the sale wasn't valid. The house had never legally become Andrew's property. When my aunt died 2 years ago, the property should have reverted to her estate. To my mother. To me. Andrew had been living in a house he didn't own for over 20 years, too arrogant or too stupid to realize his lies would eventually catch up to him. I laughed, actually laughed, sitting alone in my car. All this time he'd been threatening to evict me from a house that was never his to begin with. My hands steadied as I organized the documents carefully. I had everything I needed now. Proof of the conditional transfer. Proof that Andrew had failed to meet the terms. Proof that this house belonged to my family, not his. I drove home feeling calmer than I had in weeks. I called a locksmith from my car before going inside. I need the locks changed at 847 Riverside Drive, I said. Today if possible. The locksmith arrived an hour after Andrew left for work. I showed him proof of ownership, the county records, my aunt's original deed, documentation showing the transfer was never completed. In property disputes, possession with legitimate claim was everything. You sure about this? The locksmith asked. These situations can get messy. I'm sure. He changed every lock in the house. Front door. Back door. Garage. Basement office. When he reached that locked basement door he raised an eyebrow. This one too. Especially that one. The door swung open revealing Andrew's private domain. File cabinets. A desk covered in papers. And there in the bottom drawer of that desk I found more proof. Documents Andrew had hidden. Letters from my aunt he'd never shown me. Evidence of his deception going back decades. I spent the afternoon organizing everything. By the time I finished I had an airtight case. When Andrew came home that evening his key didn't work. I heard him try it 3 times before he started pounding on the door. Elena. Open this door right now. I took my time walking to the door. When I opened it I kept the chain lock engaged. What do you want? I asked calmly. His face was purple with rage. What did you do to the locks? Changed them. Legally. Andrew threw his shoulder against the door but the chain held. You can't lock me out of my own house. Your house. I let the words hang there. Are you sure about that? Something in my tone made him pause. I saw the first flicker of uncertainty cross his face. Let me in, Elena. Now. No. I'll call the police. Go ahead, I said. I'll show them the property records. The ones that prove you never owned this house. The ones that show you've been committing fraud for 23 years. All the color drained from Andrew's face. What are you talking about? The conditional transfer, Andrew. The one you never completed. The one where you were supposed to add my name to the deed the moment we got married. Remember that. He grabbed the door frame, his knuckles white. You don't know what you're talking about. I have the documents. All of them. From the county. From the basement you thought I'd never access. From my aunt's own files. I held up the manila folder so he could see it through the gap in the door. You were supposed to share this house with me. That was the deal. That was what Marion required. That's not, you can't. You betrayed her trust. You took her money and her generosity and you twisted it into something ugly. And now it's all coming back. Andrew's rage exploded. You ungrateful, after everything I've done for you. After giving you a home, a life. You gave me nothing, I said quietly. Everything you have came from my family. And you tried to steal it all. I closed the door in his face and turned the deadbolt. Andrew didn't leave. He stood on the porch, alternating between shouting threats and trying to force the door open. I called the police non-emergency line and calmly explained the situation. An officer arrived 20 minutes later. I watched through the window as Andrew tried to explain to the officer that this was his house, that I was his wife refusing him entry. The officer asked for proof of ownership. Andrew had none. No current deed. No mortgage papers in his name. Nothing. I stepped outside with my folder of documents. Officer, I can prove that this property belongs to my family's estate. My husband has been living here under false pretenses. The officer reviewed my paperwork. The county records, the conditional transfer, the failure to meet terms. His expression grew serious. Mr. Walsh, you need to leave the property, he said. This is insane. She's my wife. That may be, but she has documentation proving legal claim to this property. You don't. If you refuse to leave, I'll have to arrest you for trespassing. I finally spoke, my voice steady and clear. You can't evict me from a house you don't own, Andrew. His face went from red to white to gray. The reality was finally sinking in. All his plans, all his manipulation, all his cold dismissals, they were built on nothing. A lie he'd told so many times he'd started believing it himself. I'll get a lawyer, he sputtered. I'll fight this. You do that, I said. You'll lose. The officer escorted him to his car. Andrew tried every manipulation tactic he knew over the next few days. He called incessantly, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic to threatening. He showed up at my work, causing a scene until security removed him. He sent emails claiming I was ruining his life, destroying his reputation, stealing his home. You're being vindictive, he wrote in one message. This isn't who you are, Elena. Think about our marriage, our history together. Don't throw it all away over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. That's what he called 23 years of lies. I didn't respond to any of it. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Caroline who specialized in property disputes, advised me to document everything but engage with nothing. He's desperate, Caroline said during one meeting. He knows he has no legal standing. All he can do now is try to manipulate you into giving up your claim voluntarily. That won't happen, I said firmly. Good. Because you have one of the strongest cases I've seen. The conditional transfer was never completed. The property never legally became his. And with your aunt's estate as your backing, you're essentially the rightful owner. I walked out of Caroline's office feeling lighter than I had in months. Andrew's fortress was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. That evening, I saw him packing a bag through the window before he realized I was watching. Thought it was over. Andrew had packed his belongings, stopped calling, stopped showing up. The house was finally, blissfully quiet. I spent the evening reorganizing, reclaiming spaces that had felt hostile for weeks. I opened windows, letting fresh air sweep through rooms that had felt suffocating. I was finally free. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello. Elena, this is Catherine. Andrew's mother. I froze. Catherine and I had never been close. She'd always been polite but distant, treating me like a temporary addition to Andrew's life rather than a permanent partner. What do you want? I asked, my guard up. I need to talk to you. About the house. Her voice was strained, tired. Can we meet? Please. Just coffee. Just talk. Something in her tone made me hesitate. This wasn't manipulation. This was something else. Tomorrow. 1 o'clock. The cafe on Main Street. Thank you, she said quietly and hung up. I sat in the empty house, wondering what Andrew's mother could possibly have to say. Was this another attempt to convince me to give up my claim? Would she defend her son's actions? I didn't sleep well that night. The conversation with Catherine replayed in my mind, her voice carrying a weight I couldn't quite identify. The next day I arrived at the cafe early and ordered coffee. Catherine appeared exactly at 1, looking older than I remembered. She sat down heavily, ordering nothing. I'm not here to defend Andrew, she said immediately. Catherine folded her hands on the table, her expression pained. I need to tell you something I should have told you years ago. About Marion. About the house. I leaned forward, my coffee forgotten. When Andrew wanted to buy that house, he didn't have enough money. He'd just started his career and had nothing saved. I assumed he'd wait, work longer, save more. He paused, struggling with the words. But he went to your aunt instead. He'd met her at your mother's birthday party. He knew she was wealthy and he knew she cared about you. My chest tightened. He used me to get to her. Catherine nodded, shame flooding her face. He convinced Marion that he wanted to marry you, that he wanted to build a life with you. He was so happy. She'd always worried about you finding someone stable. So she gave him the money with conditions. That he'd put my name on the deed. Yes. Marion was very clear. She said, this house is for Elena's future. I want her protected. I want her name on that property the moment you marry her. Catherine's voice broke. Andrew promised he would. He swore to her. But he never did. No. After Marion gave him the money, he kept stalling. He told her there were legal complications, paperwork issues, bank problems. And Marian believed him because she trusted him. Catherine looked up at me, tears in her eyes. She died never knowing he'd lied to her. She died thinking you were protected, that you owned half that house. I felt something crack inside my chest. My aunt had tried to protect me and Andrew had betrayed her trust. I assumed you knew, Catherine continued. When Andrew told me Marian had helped with the house, I thought you were aware of the arrangement. I thought your name was on the deed like Marian wanted. She wiped her eyes. It wasn't until last week when Andrew called me in a panic that I learned the truth. What did he tell you? That you'd discovered the conditional transfer. That you were trying to steal his house. She laughed bitterly. I pulled the records myself. I saw what he'd done. How he'd lied to Marian, lied to you, lied to everyone. I sat back processing this. Andrew's own mother knew the truth. His own mother was on my side. He called me selfish, Catherine said quietly. When I told him he needed to make this right, he called me a traitor. Said I was choosing you over my own son. She met my eyes. I am choosing you. Because you're right and he's wrong. What Andrew did was unforgivable. Word of Andrew's deception spread quietly but inevitably through our social circle. Not because I said anything, I didn't have to. Catherine told Andrew's sister, who told her husband, who told their friends. The truth rippled outward. People stopped returning Andrew's calls. Mutual friends began avoiding him. His carefully constructed image of the successful, trustworthy businessman crumbled. Everyone now knew he'd built his life on stolen money and broken promises. Meanwhile, I walked through the house alone, room by room, seeing it with new eyes. The house felt different now. Not just because Andrew was gone, but because I understood its history. Every room held a piece of my aunt's love, her desire to protect me, her belief that I deserved stability and security. I stood in the master bedroom, looking at walls that had felt hostile weeks ago. Now they just felt like walls. Empty. Waiting to be filled with something new. I considered selling. The house held too many bad memories, too much pain. I could start fresh somewhere else, somewhere without Andrew's shadow. But as I walked through each room, I realized something. This wasn't Andrew's house. It had never been his. This was Marian's gift to me, a foundation she'd wanted me to have. Selling it would be throwing away her love, her sacrifice, her belief in my future. I wasn't going to let Andrew take that from me too. Instead, I made a decision. I would stay. I would transform this place into a true home. My home. I would honor Marian's memory by living in the security she'd tried to give me. I started small. I repainted the bedroom in soft blues and grays, colors I'd always loved but Andrew had vetoed. I replaced the heavy, dark curtains with light, airy ones that let sunshine flood the room. Each change felt like reclaiming territory. Each fresh coat of paint covered years of lies. 3 weeks later, Andrew came back. I saw him from the window, standing on the porch, looking smaller somehow. Defeated. He knocked softly, not his usual aggressive pounding. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "Elena," he said quietly. "Can we talk?" "About what?" "About everything. About the house. About us." He looked at his feet. "I made mistakes. Huge mistakes. I know that now. I was selfish and stupid and I hurt you. But maybe we can work through this. Maybe we can start over." I studied his face, searching for genuine remorse. All I saw was desperation. He hadn't come here because he was sorry. He'd come here because he had nowhere else to go. "No," I said simply. "Elena, please. I'll sign whatever papers you want. I'll add your name to everything. I'll make it right. It's too late for that. We've been together for years. Doesn't that count for something?" I thought about that. All those years of trust he'd exploited. All those times I'd signed papers without reading them because I believed in him. All those moments he'd dismissed my questions or redirected my concerns. "Those years taught me something important," I said. "They taught me what I won't accept anymore. What I won't tolerate. What I deserve." "And what's that?" "Better than you." His face crumpled and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice steady. "Caroline is handling it. You'll receive the papers next week." Andrew's hands clenched. "You're really going to do this?" "I already have." "What am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go?" I almost laughed. After everything he'd done, The eviction notice, the manipulation, the systematic sabotage. He was asking me to solve his problems? That's not my concern anymore, Andrew. I'm your husband. On paper. But this marriage ended the moment you tried to evict me from my own home. I stepped back, preparing to close the door. You chose this path. You made these decisions. Now you get to live with the consequences. Elena, please. No. The word came out firm and final. I spent years making myself smaller to fit into your life. I ignored red flags. I dismissed my instincts. I let you control me because I thought that's what marriage meant. I met his eyes directly. But I'm done. I'm done apologizing for taking up space. I'm done letting you make me feel like I'm the problem. I never meant. Yes, you did. Every choice you made was deliberate. You knew exactly what you were doing. I started closing the door. Goodbye, Andrew. Wait. He grabbed the doorframe. Can't we at least? No. I removed his hand gently but firmly. There's nothing left to say. I closed the door and turned the lock. Through the window, I watched him stand there for a long moment before finally walking away, shoulders slumped, defeated. Over the following months, I transformed the house completely. The heavy furniture Andrew preferred was replaced with pieces I chose. The dark paint gave way to warm, inviting colors. I filled the rooms with plants and books and artwork that made me smile. Friends visited regularly now. The house filled with laughter and conversation with life. It stopped being a museum of a failed marriage and became something better. A home. I learned that Andrew had moved into a small apartment across town. He was working a different job now, something lower paying, struggling to rebuild the reputation he'd destroyed. I felt no satisfaction in his struggles, but no sympathy either. He'd made his choices. The divorce finalized quietly. Andrew didn't fight it. He couldn't afford to, legally or financially. The house, the property, everything, it all stayed mine. As it should have been from the beginning. Catherine visited once, bringing a box of photos of Marion. I thought you'd want these, she said. She loved you so much, Elena. She'd be proud of how you handled all this. I spent that evening looking through the photos. Marion at my graduation. Marion at family gatherings. Marion always with that knowing smile, like she could see futures the rest of us couldn't. Thank you, I whispered to her memory. Thank you for trying to protect me. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand. The house felt peaceful now. Complete. I stood in the doorway on a bright Saturday morning, coffee in hand, watching sunlight pour through the windows I'd opened wide. The house glowed warm and golden, every corner filled with the life I'd built for myself. It had been a year since Andrew tried to evict me. A year since I found the hidden deed and discovered the truth. A year since my world shattered and I had to rebuild it piece by piece. But I had rebuilt it. Stronger. Better. On my own terms. The eviction notice was still in my desk drawer. I kept it as a reminder, not of Andrew's betrayal but of my own strength. The moment I decided to fight back. The moment I stopped accepting less than I deserved. People asked me sometimes if I regretted staying in the house. If the memories were too painful. I always smiled and shook my head. This house wasn't about Andrew. It never had been. It was about Marion's love. About my own resilience. About learning that I was stronger than I ever knew. He tried to evict me from my own home. He tried to break me, to force me out, to make me small and powerless. But in the end he was the one who didn't belong. I took a sip of coffee and stepped back inside, closing the door on the past and walking forward into the future I'd built for myself. The house was mine. The life was mine. The strength was mine. And nobody was ever taking it away again.